Welcome to the first episode of Aviation Writer's Block. I'm Scott Hamilton, editor of Leeham News. This is a new feature complementing our 10 Minutes About podcast series. Like 10 Minutes About, Aviation Writer's Block will run periodically as news or issues warrant. Unlike 10 Minutes About, which has only one guest, Aviation Writer's Block has three guests in addition to me, the moderator. 10 Minutes About is limited to 10 minutes, which fancy that, given the name. We're going to try to limit the writer's block to about 20 minutes, befitting the additional participants. Joining today for this aviation writer's block are three distinguished writers in alphabetical order. First is Richard Abalafia, Vice President with the Teal Group consulting firm. Richard also writes regularly for Aviation Week magazine and Forbes Online. Richard is located in Washington, D.C. Next is Andrew McIntosh, the aerospace reporter for the Puget Sound Business Journal in Seattle. Finally, Dan Reed joins us from Fort Worth, Texas, and he always wants to be sure that we say it's Fort Worth, not Dallas-Fort Worth. Dan was the airline reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, USA Today, and he currently contributes to Forbes Online. He's also an accomplished book author. Kicking off the Aviation Writer's Block feature is Calhoun's Countdown. David Calhoun is the CEO of the Boeing company. He turns 64 on April 18th. Boeing has a mandatory retirement policy at age 65. So Calhoun begins his countdown on his final year Sunday, unless the board of directors extends his contract. Our Aviation Writer's Block will tackle some of the issues facing Calhoun in his final year in office and what his legacy is going to be or what it should be. With this rather lengthy introduction, let's get started. So with 1 year left, what does he have to do? And let's start with Richard Abalafia.
There's the stuff that sort of is, obviously bearing the slings and arrows of the market and making the most of the circumstances, that's a big part of it. So managing inventory, keeping the capability for the production ramp in place for when the good times return. Obviously, continuing MAX return to service, clearing that inventory, managing whatever they can do with China, because ultimately China is 30% of the market, and there are all these geopolitical and macroeconomic tensions beyond anyone's pay grade, even in this entire industry. So that, whatever he can affect on the margins there will help, but there's not a great deal he can do. I would argue that there's a big picture challenge for the CEO of Boeing to return the company to its engineering roots and start talking in terms of new product development and coming up with an overarching strategy to get back on the path to engineering excellence. That does not appear to be happening right now. Right now, we've got sort of the triumph of tactics over strategy. Now, to be fair, it's good to be doing tactically the right thing. It's good to see the MAX back in service. It's good to see that the company is doing everything it can to prepare for, the good times to return and keeping the supply chain intact. So there are some good things, but it's not the kind of, return to big picture growth opportunity thinking that the company was once famous for.
Andrew, what do you think? You're right here in Seattle. So you get to follow Boeing very closely. What are your views about what David Calhoun has yet to do?
Well, the way I see it, he's got five things to do. He's got to retain key talent inside the company, and that's a problem right now because Boeing has no cash to award star performers raises, and I'm seeing lots of chatter about that. And just down the road in Puget Sound, you have a rocket company called Blue Origin that has Jeff Bezos's billions, and they're luring away Boeing talent left, right, and center. So that's one thing. The second thing is they, as Richard said, they have to keep the production system healthy. They have to keep suppliers alive. We had a story this week about one of those suppliers, Tech Aerospace, filing for bankruptcy protection under a Chapter 11 filing. And the filing revealed just how much Boeing is doing and how much they're spending to keep these suppliers alive, to the tune of $60 million just for one of them, a sole source supplier on the MAX. So that tells you that's a challenge there. I think the other ones, that's a challenge there. I think the other ones involve getting the 777X certified by the Federal Aviation Administration. There's been delays there. The FAA has signaled that it's going to be a lot tougher on people going forward. And I think the last thing, and he's sort of intimated that he feels they're close to being around the corner on this, but I keep not seeing it, which is the fix the KC-46 tanker woes. If he can get those things all done, then there's not much left for him to do except get the plans ready for the launching of a new jet, and then punch his ticket and be gone.
Dan, you're not really covering Boeing every day. You're more of an airline guy. What are the airlines telling you that they have issues continuing with Boeing, and what do they say Boeing needs to do, and Calhoun?
Well, you're seeing it even this week with some of the news that Southwest made with their rejiggering of their 737 MAX orders and extending it. They are wanting Boeing to pay them for all the pain Boeing has caused them. At least in their view, Boeing's the cause. So I think they're making progress on that. It's expensive, it's painful for Boeing. But I think they're making progress on that, and they're getting there, at least as much as they're going to get there. The 737 MAX is now, in delivery again and in service again. The 787 and the 777, both delayed on very annoyingly to the airlines, are getting back on track. They're not entirely there yet, but they're like the 78's there pretty much, and 777 probably will be soon. So the airlines are not that annoyed because Boeing has opened its pocketbooks and paid. Airlines also know that if they're Boeing customers right now, they can't just go pick up airplanes in Toulouse. There's just not enough capacity. So they're locked into Boeing, and they know that, and Boeing knows that. However, this is a long game, not a short game, even though Boeing had a staggering loss in 2020. Everybody's playing the long game here. This is about 2030, 2040, not 2021. That said, I think Calhoun has to decide, does he want to be a transitional figure that spends 2.5 years, which is what it would be if he retires a year from now, he spends his 2.5 years trying to get the company back on its feet and making some hard calls that will clear the way for his successor to come in and to become a transformational character? Or does Calhoun want to become a transformational character himself? If he does, he's going to have to be extended beyond next year. I don't know what Boeing's board thinks of that. But he can only hope to be a transitional character under the current time frame. So does he want to take some hard calls to do the things that would make him a little less popular, that would take that burden off his successor's back and clear the way for his successor to really turn the company back or into something new, positive going forward?
Well, I'd say he's already on the path of making some hard calls.
Yeah, I would too, but there's more to be made.
Well, that's exactly right, and we'll get to some of those issues here in a moment. You've touched a little bit on legacy here, transformational or transition. What do you guys think that his legacy is really going to be? Is he going to be Mac the Knife legacy? Is he going to be somebody who just writes the ship and then turns it over to a successor? And I have heard nothing about a succession plan at all. We can speculate about some names, most of which probably don't mean anything to most people listening to this Zoomcast. But what do you think his legacy is going to be?
Well, I think they're done with going outside the company for succession. I think the Kevin McAllister experiment proved that was just not a good thing. McAllister, a lovely, charming, wonderful man, just didn't fit in with the Boeing culture. because of his being from outside. But I'd say Calhoun's legacy is going to be an interesting one. It could be his legacy will be tossing Muhlenberg under the bus in a New York Times interview. It could be for returning the MAX to service, and it may be a little too early to judge him on that one. It could be on board renewal. He's brought in some interesting people to the board, though probably, as many have said, not enough engineers there to win on that front. And heck, at this point, with Boeing 20 billion in the hole, just remarketing all those 450 737 Maxes that piled up all at Moses Lake and everywhere else, that would be a feat worthy of a legacy in itself.
Let me jump in here before we get Richard and Dan to weigh in a little bit more on this. I would make two observations. Andrew, you mentioned that McAllister did not fit in with the Boeing culture. I would make the argument that the Boeing culture needs to be changed. And it wasn't that McAllister needed to fit in with the Boeing culture. McAllister needed to change the Boeing culture at Boeing Commercial Airplanes and failed to do so. That would be point number one. Point number two, as far as engineers on the board is concerned, if you look at the proxy statement, Boeing makes a point of saying that they have 7 engineers on the board of directors now. Now, none of them happens to be an aerospace engineer, which I think is still a big gap. And they still don't have any representation from the commercial aviation industry on the board, which I think is a big gap. But with those two observations, Richard, why don't you weigh in?
Yeah, obviously, I pretty much see it the way you do there, Scott. They need some fundamental cultural changes. So getting to the question of how Calhoun is perceived, it really comes down to what happens next. He did make a couple of tough calls, and I actually would defend, for example, shelving the NMA. I thought it was the wrong plane for the job. I think they need a plane in that slot, but the NMA was the wrong plane. I think he did the right thing. Similarly, there was a lot of rather expensive experimentation with Next and Horizon and all that other stuff that probably needed to be reined in a time of budget frugality. But on the other hand, he has not done much to talk about returning that engineering culture that once defined the company. He has not said anything about what they might do next. The facts on the ground are that he cut independent research and development last year by 27%. And of course, that is pure people. Those are the talent, that is the talent pool. And yeah, we've met an awful lot of them. Some of them go to Blue Origin, whatever else, some go elsewhere. There's a diaspora. That's not good for an industry that depends upon experienced design teams to launch new programs. So, when we discuss his legacy or what it will be, I think it'll come down to what happens next. If this is the start of Boeing just being an asset, a legacy asset managing company, basically just on a 30-year glide slope of harvesting what they'd done, both on the civil and military side, because military, they're not winning very many new projects either, then he'll be remembered as the last hope that really didn't come to anything. He'll be remembered as, somebody who just reinforced the forces of capital and nothing else. On the other hand, if either he or someone comes in and does something that's transformational, launches a new program, stresses the importance of an engineering culture, appoints more engineers, reinforces the links between engineering and management, and makes sure that this culture gets extended to the military side too, then Calhoun will be remembered as the guy who helped pave the way for all that, or maybe even did it himself, the one who kept the ship righted. So it all depends on what happens next in the next couple of years.
And Dan, what do you think his legacy is going to be?
Well, that comes back to, is he going to be a transformational or a transitional? I would bet he will be a transitional character anyway. He will not be extended beyond next year. It's not Boeing's way. And you got to remember, Calhoun comes out of the GE management culture, which really is market focused, not engineering focused. I don't think that's his bailiwick. I think he recognizes that it probably needs to happen. And his job will be, I think if he's wise, his job will be to mow under some of the opposition to the change that needs to happen, start identifying, and he probably has begun this already, identifying good people on the engineering side who can swim with the sharks on the market-focused folks side of the company. I mean, there has to be a balance between the two, of course, but engineering used to be preeminent there. It has not been for some time now. That's probably, I think everybody generally agrees, that's where a lot of the problems came from, the lack of balance. But I think he will settle for the transitional role and take some of the heat for big changes coming down the road, which would likely include, well, has to include at some point a new airplane. It has to probably include moving some assets out of high-cost Washington State.
So my view is that Calhoun really has two choices. Does he want his legacy to be that of somebody who picked up all the marbles and sort of righted the ship, to mix all the metaphors here? Or does he want to have his legacy be somebody who did that and launched a new airplane for the future? Now, I agree with you that launching a new airplane program by next April in 2022 is a pretty short time frame. And if he at least got to the end of the year, I think the likelihood of a new airplane program being launched in 2022 goes up on his watch anyway. Otherwise, I think he would be looking at 2023 at the earliest before he'd launch a new airplane program. So would that become Calhoun extended, or would that become Calhoun successor? So that's a good thing. Question. But since we're talking about a new airplane, Richard, you've already said that you thought the NMA, trashing the NMA was a good move. And I know that in other forums, you've suggested that they do a single aisle airplane. Could you expand a little bit on your thinking?
Yeah, you look at the numbers, the operating economics and the manufacturing costs of a twin versus single. It's really basically impossible to bridge that gap. We've looked at every possible combination of tubes and engines, and it just doesn't seem realistic that they could come up with a twin aisle that matched the A321neo in terms of price and in terms of operating economics. Now, it could have more capabilities if they don't do the original concept for a fuselage. It would have belly, which the 321 does not have, belly cargo. It could get to 5,500 or even 6,000 nautical miles, which would give them a bunch of new routes. But, Neo XLR with 4,750 for a lot of those routes is going to be the preferred lower cost option. So, for me, the NMA as it was almost like it was gouging into the 787s territory as a kind of global route fragmenter. Whereas what they really need is something that can trounce the 321 before it gives Airbus another 10 points in market share, because I think that's what's at play here. So the answer to the question to me is something in the same size class as the 757-300, obviously wider, all new wings, engines in the 40,000 pound thrust class. I think they do a fantastic job. I think it would be very easy to beat the 321neo before it runs away with all the prizes. But I just don't hear much discussion about this, and that really concerns me. So whether or not Calhoun launches it or authorization to offer it, it would be a great time now to start talking with customers, with suppliers, with investors about what they're looking at and thinking about.
Dan, you talk to the airlines. What are they telling you about a new airplane program?
They're not talking to Boeing or Airbus right now about new planes. They're trying to get their nose above water. They've got all the planes they need on order for the next couple of years. They have time. I think it probably figured into the NMA equation too. I agree with Richard. It wasn't really the right plane. It would have been okay. It wouldn't have been great. And it probably would not have been a big profit maker. But the airlines are not. I mean, there's an old adage goes way back to the 30s, 1930s, of airlines buy order planes when they're flush and take delivery when they're in trouble. And right now they're in trouble, which means they're not buying. So they don't have to produce an airplane by next April to keep the airlines happy. They need to have something deliverable somewhere around 26, 27, in that range. Probably along the lines of what Richard laid out. That's probably what they want. And I would imagine they keep the conversation going, but they're not talking seriously to Boeing right now. They're worried about bigger, more immediate issues from their perspective.
Well, when you talk about an airplane deliverable in 26 or 27, they'd have to launch that airplane right now. So I think you're a couple of years early.
Yeah, my years are probably off there, but they're not ready to order anything.
Andrew, you're close.
And when they do, they may well convert some existing orders into a new plane.
Yeah. Andrew, you're close to the supply chain. We've seen some notes from some of the analysts that Boeing is, in fact, talking to the supply chain about a new airplane. What light can you shed on this from your own sources?
Well, that report by Canaccord Genuity said they were talking to at least 8 different suppliers, and that many more had heard about the talks that Boeing had been engaged in, but were not involved in them themselves. So it was kind of curious. And then I keep hearing these other noises about not one new airplane, but a family of new airplanes of different sizes. And I wonder, if it has anything to do with the 737 MAX 10 delayed certification. Is that, are we ever going to see a MAX 10? Or is it going to be some kind of a future single aisle airplane that almost is the size of an NMA that is loaded with all the new technology that Calhoun has publicly said Boeing is developing in their labs and things, and just is ready to pull the trigger when the time is right. He keeps saying the time is not right. So, but we all know how long it takes to launch, source, and develop a new airplane program with engines behind it. I'm not sure. There's a lot of noise, so much that there's smoke, and the other part of this is the engines. And we here in Washington State saw Rolls-Royce come in to Moses Lake buy an old 747 passenger plane from Qantas and refit it as part of a new test engine bed program for a new turbofan. And there's the word on the ground in Moses Lake, where people are pretty tight, is that might be the new engine for this new Boeing airplane somehow. Now, there's a lot of strands there that may or may not stitch together at some point, but there's just more than enough smoke to say that Boeing's doing something, and they're just trying to keep their cards close to their chest as long as they can, because they don't want to give Airbus and the A321XLR any time to pivot and readjust to the market based on what Boeing might bring to it or not.
Well, you're exactly right on that point, Andrew. Boeing is playing things very close to the vest. Now, we at Leeham Company absolutely believe that the NMA, or the next Boeing airplane, should be a 3-member family. Ta-da! Right there. And that it's a twin aisle family. When you get up to an airplane that is 250, 270 passengers, 2 class, you're talking about an airplane that is longer than the 757-300. And you're talking about a lot of gate time when you have an airplane that's that long. And there are ramp constraints to an airplane that big. We've actually spent a lot of time looking at this ourselves. And you can actually get an airplane at 200 passengers that's a twin aisle that we believe, Richard, is economically competitive with a 321. Now, you are absolutely right that the 321 is going to have less capital cost to it, but that's just the nature of a new airplane versus a derivative airplane.
I would point out that if you baseline it at 250 to 270, you're never going to get anywhere against the 321. I mean, to a certain extent, it's going to be an engine battle, and you've got at minimum 50,000 pound thrust motors needed for your family there. And that's going to be going against what, 36, something like that on the 321 XLR.
Well, I didn't suggest that the baseline would be 250, but what Boeing has been talking about is 220 to 250. And if you add something in to take out the max 10 and be more directly competitive with the 321, you start at 200. So that said, we're running out of time here. Let's do a lightning round. And number one, will the board extend Calhoun's term beyond April of 2022? Yes or no? Andrew?
Yes, because he stacked the board with people that are friendly to him.
Richard?
I don't know. I wouldn't think this holds that much appeal for him. I can't tell for sure, but I'll vote no.
That was my caveat. I was going to say he's like he took a pay cut to join Boeing from BlackRock, and I think he's really anxious to get back to the money world as opposed to the aircraft world.
Well, he'll be 65 and he's rich already, so I'm not sure money is everything that he needs at this point. Dan, yes or no?
No, with the caveat that if they need him to stay on 6 months, maybe even a full extra year just to get the new guy in place, because unlike Andrew, I think they're going outside for a replacement.
I will vote that they may extend it to the end of the year. And I actually think there's somebody, one of the new guys on the board who could be a candidate, but I won't tell you who. So then the next question is, will Calhoun launch a new airplane program, whether it's a single aisle or a twin aisle? Dan, let's start with you.
I'm going to guess no, but if he does, he won't build it.
Richard?
Yeah, I vote no. I mean, but it's not just him. I mean, there's so much power over the company just from an investor standpoint. I think they're kind of running the show partly through the office of Greg Smith and whatever else. It doesn't seem like the system of decision making goes through engineering very much at all anymore. And in terms of long-term strategy, not really either. So given that set of drivers, I just don't think it's going to be really hard for anyone to launch a new plane in those circumstances, period.
Andrew?
I think he'll tee it up and let his successor make the decision. He'll put everything in place so that a decision can be made, and there will be pros and there will be cons, and he'll want the next guy or woman to make the call.
I think 2022 is a year too soon. I think a program would be launched in 2023, maybe 2024, but certainly in one of those 2 years. Now,
that's the kind of timeline he's talked about publicly. He's tantalized the investment community with talk of a new plane and what they might do with all that empty factory space up in Everett now that the Dreamliner program is shifted entirely to South Carolina. That opens up a lot of floor space. And just early next year, the 747 program is done and completely finished. So that opens up a lot more space. And there's been a lot of military jets flying in and out of Everett the last little while. Now, are they going to launch a new military program in there? Some have speculated that might be what's going on with all those trips in and out. Or are they looking at the floor space to see, as Calhoun said, we're not going to leave floor space empty for long, but we're not going to rush into a decision either.
I think all those military trips might be trying to get the 46 program online, but will a new airplane be a single aisle or a twin aisle? Richard obviously votes for a single aisle. Dan, I think you kind of were leaning in that direction. I vote for a twin aisle. Andrew, what do you vote for?
Airlines would vote for a twin aisle.
Yeah, I think that the airlines will vote for the one that has the cheapest sticker price that they can get them.
Okay, and the final question as we get ready to wrap it up here, Boeing Commercial Airplanes headquarters here in Seattle is now officially up for sale. So a two-part question, will BCA headquarters remain in Puget Sound as Boeing says it will, or will it go elsewhere? And if it does go elsewhere, where will it go? Andrew, you're again our local reporter here.
I think it's going to, the BCA headquarters will stay here in Seattle. I think if any headquarters moves, it's going to be Boeing corporate in Chicago. They went to Chicago with 60 million in tax incentives that run out this year. They've got a huge, big, empty office that they own themselves in the suburbs of DC. And I'm hearing noise about a possible move there, though nobody will confirm or deny it. So that would be my guess.
Richard, you are in DC. What do you think?
Yeah, they could join Amazon with HQ too or something. I
BCA
think
headquarters stay here or go elsewhere?
I agree with Andrew. I think it stays there. And I'm not really convinced that they're not just going to sell these buildings only to lease them back for some tax purposes or accounting purposes.
Dan, do you have an opinion as to whether BCA will stay here or not?
I'm less plugged in on Boeing, but I would expect BCA to stay there. I would expect some, not all, not necessarily final assembly, but some of their property, some of their expensive operations to be moved out of Washington State. And I joke that they'd be coming to Texas like everybody else.
I'm going to be the outlier here. I think BCA headquarters is eventually going to go to Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
With that, gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thanks for, we went over time, but this is our first one, so it was bound to happen, I think. Thank you, and we will do this again. Good
It's
night.
fun and a pleasure.
Fine.